This is the L.I.P. Extra. Hey there, I'm Ryan from Positive Athlete, here with another awesome episode of the L.I.P. Extra. Today we have our good friend Dr. Tiffany Jones back on to talk further in depth about mental health and mental performance. Dr. Tiff's such an amazing communicator on this subject, and I'm sure you'll learn something by listening to her today. So let's jump into episode 9 of the L.I.P. Extra.
We're welcoming back a guest that we had earlier this year, and Dr. Tiffany Jones, a mental performance coach and sports psychologist. And Dr. Tiff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back, Scott. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we love talking to you. And today's topic, though, we're going to focus a little bit on mental health and as it relates to athletes. And so for the purpose of this, the first thing I'd like to hear is kind of your definition of what exactly is mental health, because people have a lot of definitions, and I'd like to at least kind of put it under this umbrella for this conversation.
Sure. I always explain it is that we all have mental health. So we all have health, and we all can struggle with our mental health. It's just like physical health or any other kind of health that you're thinking, like sleep health, anything. And so it's really developing the skills in terms of coping skills and understanding like where stress and pressure are coming from that we all feel on a regular basis, especially with what's going on in the world today. And so everyone needs to address their mental health. Now, mental illness is typically something that's been diagnosed by a professional in the field, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, nurse practitioner, social worker, and that can be found somewhere in the DSM-5 revised version of the diagnostic tools. And I think when we talk mental health, a lot of people knee-jerk and go, I'm not sick, I don't have a problem, I'm not crazy. I mean, that's the terminology you hear. And I'm like, no, we all have to take care of our mental and the health of our mental state. And so it's just understanding that there's a difference between those two. And just because you're struggling with some mental health doesn't mean that you have necessarily a mental illness.
You know, it's interesting because this didn't just happen. All right. We didn't, this whole idea of mental health and everything. Why do you think in the last year it has become such a hot topic?
I think it's being more accepted to talk about. I think obviously with everything that's going on in the world today, the pandemic, some of the social justice issues that are going on, losing jobs, all of that, it's coming to a head. More and more people are recognizing it. They've been by themselves sitting with their own thoughts and feelings and have maybe paid attention to it a little bit more. So I do think it's becoming more socially acceptable to discuss it. I also think, I'm sorry, but the technology piece of it, the more we use tech, the more that we're not developing the necessary skills and healthy coping skills. I think a lot of us just go and grab our devices or get on social media to try to distract ourselves from our thoughts and our feelings, and then we stuff everything down, and then eventually you're going to implode or explode. And I think this is also a time where it's hitting every single demographic in our country, and no one's immune to it. Everyone can struggle with mental health, and I think then we have some pro athletes who are coming out and discussing it. I know Dak Prescott just came out and discussed, his anxiety and struggling with depression, which is again more on the clinical end. But not dealing with your mental health can lead to some mental illness. So I do think that this is something that our kids are struggling with, adults are struggling with, and it crosses race, gender, ethnicity, age, everything.
A lot of coaches obviously watch our show, and so I'm sure a lot of them kind of wonder, as a coach, how do I help my athletes with this, and is there anything I can do to help them kind of manage this?
I think a lot of it is, again, these are life skills. And I think the first step of it is to have a safe space where they can be vulnerable and they can really talk about what they are thinking and feeling without judgment, without always saying you're fine, or you just need to suck it up and get through it. Those are not like coping skills. So again, I constantly am talking about reflections, or writing your rut, which is your raw and filtered thoughts, and allowing an athlete, a child, a student athlete and coaches, you need to use this as well, is when you start to recognize that I'm feeling stress, pressure, anxiety, frustration, I'm mad all the time, is to write a rut. That's a perfect time to write a rut. Get all your thoughts, get all your feelings, Doesn't matter how you write it, doesn't matter what it looks like, it's just get it down on paper. And so many athletes, just by doing that step, they feel better. But what that does is it gives you insight as a coach to be able to ask more questions and help that athlete process through really what they're thinking and feeling. Because remember, we don't feel anything unless we think it first or we focus on it first.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think the one that everybody's kind of drawn to is, this whole issue of, what they've had to do, athletes have had to do, with COVID. But there's been a lot of other triggers, outside us, even before that the kids have had to deal with. And so COVID is just one of those things, right? It's one of those topics. What are the other kinds of things that you see that athletes are kind of dealing with, in addition to things like COVID?
Well, it's the future. I mean, different things with scholarships and now with things going on in college athletics, whether they're an athlete or not, is, acceptance rates. And if a lot of students deferred, that's going to leave less spaces at that particular school for incoming students. So you see that. I mean, there's stressors at home with family, especially if family members have lost jobs or they're maybe struggling with some mental health things. I think, what to do with, again, always time management is something, but the uncertainty of the future, really, and that's partly with COVID, but it's all the social justice things going on. And I don't know how long these changes, and I think you're going to see everlasting changes. So here they are, they're living with people where our lives have been pretty consistent over time, at least in terms of our society. And now things are kind of blowing up all over the place. And so how the parents and adults are responding and showing their emotions is impacting our kids. If we were pretty stable, our kids would probably follow our lead a little bit. But also, again, being on social media and there being so many different mixed messages out there and what to believe and what not to believe. And I just think there's so much on their plate. And that's why sports can be such a great outlet, whether it's in person or not, as long as they feel like they're a part of something. And that they have peers and they have a coach that cares about them and loves them, and can speak openly about different things and ask questions without being afraid of asking a question, I think is really important. But I think those are the areas that they're really struggling. And this is a great time to work on the psychological and emotional skills that coaches always tell me we don't have time to train. Well, you have lots of time to train those now.
Right. And you have, a lot of the kids watching this and coaches, we all kind of know that, the percentages of kids that are going to go on to be professional Olympic athletes. And so sport has the opportunity to really train you for life skills. And so that 2% that's going to go on or less that's going to go on to be Olympic and pro athletes, obviously, they want to be at their peak mental performance. And I think every kid believes they're going to be in that 2%. But talk about what sport teaches us in terms of dealing with mental type issues that could go on for their business career and in their relationships and things such as that.
Well, I mean, sport has the opportunity to teach. It doesn't always teach. And that's why coaches are so very important, because if you have a coach making sure they're embedding those life skills and helping those student athletes transfer those life skills onto other areas of their life, sport can be really powerful. It can teach you about adapting to different environments and adapting to things that are not in your control and focusing on the things that you can control. And it can help you understand how your thoughts do change your physiology and how that impacts the way your body moves, feels, but also how you think. So there's all these different aspects of sport that can be taught that sometimes we assume are being taught, but if we don't help the athletes transfer what they're learning, they just don't do it on themselves. And so even work ethic, like we throw around things like work ethic and confidence and focus all the time, and we assume our athletes understand what that really means and how to do it. And then we assume that they then will take those skills and apply them to school or a job interview or taking a test. And we have to do that as adults to help give them opportunities to show them what they're learning in sport can work when they get out of sport. It doesn't just happen. And a lot of coaches will say, well, I'm teaching my kids confidence. And I'm like, how? And I'm like, well, I just tell them they need to have confidence. And I'm like, well, that's not teaching confidence. And a lot of times they don't even know what confidence is. I have a lot of pro athletes, when I ask them to define what confidence is and how you get it, they can't define it. So again, I think it's not assuming anything, and it's really breaking these skills down. But coping skills, how do you manage making mistakes? How do you train on the edge of your ability? You have to take risks and with risks come mistakes and poor execution. You can do everything right and not get the result you want. And how do you manage that and adapt to that? It's great. There's so many skills. I know most people on here listen. I just think we have to understand, are we really teaching what we think we're teaching? Do the athletes understand it? Can they apply it in sport? And then do they know how to take those skills and apply them out of sport?
Yeah, it would seem to me that, most athletes are spending money, or their parents are spending money on them, training to be a great athlete, to all of the physical skills and things like that. But I'm sure it wouldn't take much to convince you that maybe the best bang for their buck, in life, would be to start doing some training and start investing into their own lives relative to mental performance, because whether it's sports or not, their long term is going to be affected by how they handle things in life.
Yeah, I put together a virtual mental performance training or camp for 12 to 18-year-olds and coaches and parents. And I'm here working at a college right now with a very elite soccer team. And we're just talking about breath and how I don't know why we're not training our athletes about breath when they're like 6 years old. And what happens when you're under pressure and stress is you hold your breath. And when you hold your breath, you tense up. And when you tense up, it changes how your body moves, which means if you're a soccer player, your strike on the ball is going to be different. Doesn't mean you need to go practice more shooting. It started up here. And this impacted the body, which then whatever my perception is, like I have to score. So then you tense up, you hold your breath, biomechanics change. And so you miss the shot or you miss the net, not because you have poor form, but because of it all started with your thoughts. And being aware of that in the language we tell ourselves, like if we focus on the future, if we focus on a past mistake, we tense up, changes like how we even move and then how we think when we're in sport. And it should be the very first thing. Forget about the physical, technical, and tactical. We really should be starting with the psychological and emotional components of the sport. And yes, nutrition and hydration and sleep. And those are the areas that are always, fourth, fifth, sixth. And we devote very little time to them, or we think we're teaching it by these secret covert methods. And the athletes are like, I didn't even know we were training that. Like, I thought we were just running sprints. And the coach is like, no, it's building mental toughness. And I'm like, how? Like, how is that building mental toughness? Because the kids are just repeating what you're saying. But what is that really training? Physical is what that's training, unless you explain and you have some other things going on to teach the athletes about that. So yeah, I wish we all started, but just here I am talking to college women who are phenomenal. And they're like, why have we not been taught this? And now they have bad habits. They didn't even know they were holding their breath. They didn't know that like fight or flight kicks in and we are breathing like that, because that gets us away from the saber-toothed tiger, but it's not going to be leading to high level performance. You need to really learn that when you're thinking and your body starts to respond, we can all change our way we breathe. But it's a skill and it takes work. And so I always apologize. I'm like, we should have taught you this when you were 6. I'm sorry. Now you're getting it when you're 18 to 22 years old and you have bad habits that we have to override. So
you mentioned a little earlier in the conversation about writing out your ruts. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that can be one of the first steps that an athlete can do. You mentioned it in our first program, but I'd love to have you talk about that again, because I think it's such an important factor in terms of people being self-aware and people really figuring out where they are in their career.
Sure. Like day one of camp, we start with self-awareness, because without that, you're not going to be able to develop really any of your skills in sports. And when I say it's your raw, unfiltered thoughts, it's raw because it's your emotions, unfiltered because I just want you to get it out. I don't want you to, make it pretty or make it sound right or have it be what you think I want it to be as a coach or as a parent. And then thoughts, obviously, because we can first identify sometimes what we feel, but we have to then identify we feel this because we're focused on this, or we're thinking about this, or we're thinking about the what ifs, or I have tos, or I musts, or I shoulds, or I have these expectations, or I want this result, because all of those are kiss of death. All of that is going to create that tension, which I just said and explained, that it's going to impact then how your body moves and how you process, make decisions, your memory, your adaptability to different situations. All of that is impacted. And so I get ruts sent to me probably 2 to 3 times a day from different athletes, varying from my national team athletes all the way down to youth athletes. And it gives me great insight to ask further questions to the athlete, because right away I can see their emotions, I can see their thoughts. I don't laugh at their ruts. I don't say, this is ridiculous, how could you possibly be thinking this? Because we all go through that. Adults go through it. We all go down rabbit holes. We all have negative thoughts, and which leads to worries and stress and anxiety and not feeling good, and leading to being tired or sluggish. And by letting them do it, so many of them will send it and go, Tiff, first of all, I feel a lot better just getting it out. And then two, I feel better having you read it. Like it feels like a weight off my chest. And now we can really progress, because a lot of times, I just had a coach yesterday say, I know 90% of the time what they're thinking. I'm like, you do? We might know 90%, we might be dead on, but it might be the 10% we don't know that is really what's holding them back and can really help us, help them change their mindset, which will help change performance. And so we can't just assume as adults. And I never let I don't knows from athletes. Like that's kind of a cop out. So if you don't know, how am I going to help you? How can anyone help you if you yourself don't know what you're thinking and feeling? Like there's no wrong answer. What are you thinking and feeling? As long as it's raw, unfiltered, and your thoughts, that's a great place to start. It's actually the place to start.
Dr. Tiff, you have done something with X Factor Performance that is pretty cool, and created some videos, created some things people can go online to see. Talk a little bit about what you put together and how people can view that.
So we have a 5-day camp for 12 to 18-year-olds. We actually just created a college training series as well. And so there's 5 topics covering self-awareness, mentality zones, behavioral styles intermixed with mentality zones, the how. So how do you really develop mental skills? And then having to do it all under pressure is day 5. And there's a workbook that goes with it. So you don't just have to listen to me for an hour a topic. You can stop it after 15 minutes, do a couple activities, and revisit the programming. There's 5 topics for coaches as well, which is a deep dive and telling them how to implement this in practices and with their teams and athletes. And then there's a supplemental parent. So parents, I love you, but you watch this and I'm not letting you screw it up for your kids. So I help you as a parent go a little more deep dive into how this can really help your child and allow the coaches to implement some of these things to help your student athletes. And then there's 5 professional athlete interviews that are all on the psychology part of the game, and then 5 expert interviews in different, like nutrition, yoga, sport performance, experts in the field to also give their insight in terms of the psychology of what they see separates athletes that reach their excellence and athletes that don't. And that doesn't mean they go play at the next level. It just allows them to tap into and reach their excellence. So it's a ton of content, ton of material. Anything I would want to do if I worked with an individual athlete for a year or with a team for a year, this is everything, all the nuts and bolts you would need to develop the mental and emotional side of your game.
Not to give away all the content and everything, but give us a peek behind the window of what some of those athletes have kind of said that maybe even surprised you.
Well, one, that they did it, because I am just a teacher. And so I just like to teach. And so it's up to the athlete to commit to the hard work. It's extremely difficult work. I have a lot of athletes who work hard and compete when they're in between the lines, so to speak. But it's the work that's happening out of those lines, out of the gym, out of the, off the court, off the field, that is really going to allow one to unlock and reach their excellence. I don't like the word potential, because what does that even mean? It's basically like, if everything goes perfectly, you can get here, and nothing ever goes perfectly, especially if you're training on the edge of your ability and taking risks. And so, so we're getting a lot of feedback about how much the writing is helping, and reflections happen after performance, and how that's, data points to try to find themes and patterns behind behavior and performance. And one of the cool things is really identifying, if you play well, why did you play well? Not, oh, I felt good, or I felt like I was on cloud 9. Well, how are we going to replicate cloud 9 or you feel good? I want to know why you felt good. So what are the things that were in your control that led to you feeling good today? What were you thinking? What did you eat? How much sleep did you get? And over time, you get those collection of data points, and you can start to find the themes behind great performances and maybe not your best performance. And both of those pieces are really valuable. And then, of course, just understanding how to train in the right zone so that you're locked in, focused, have high energy, and the dangers of not doing that. And then helping athletes come up with their hows, because a how is not like, well, you just got to have confidence, or you just have to focus. Like, well, how do you focus? What is a way to train that focus? And so we're getting a lot of feedback about just how user-friendly it is, and how they can apply it right away. And we just give a slew of activities to become more self-aware and really learn more about yourself in all different areas.
Well, I highly recommend it because, as you can tell by this interview, there's and why we have her back, and we're going to have her back again, is the fact that Dr. Tiff does have such great information, and it is something people need to consider. This whole idea of training not just your body, but training your mind too, and because that is the difference a lot of times between success and failure.
Yep, absolutely. And again, it's uncomfortable work. It's not fun work. And you really are pulling back the curtain to really look inside of yourself and to see where you go down rabbit holes, and when do you get negative, and when do you start to doubt yourself. And none of that is fun, but it's also not fun having inconsistent performance either, and feeling like you're never truly reaching your excellence and not knowing why. And so wouldn't you rather like take this risk and see where it takes you, rather than floundering and doing all the work but not seeing any of the consistent performances? And so I really challenge, and coaches, there's a ton of resources for you. And parenting is a really hard job, maybe the hardest job out there. And parents, I just want to support you. But sometimes we say and do things that are not going to help create an environment for our athletes to feel comfortable and confident in their sport.
Awesome job, Dr. Tiff. We look forward to talking to you again on Lessons in Positivity, and best of luck with everything you got going on.
Thanks, Scott, so much. Always a pleasure.